The prison was quieter at night, a silence so heavy it seemed to hum against the concrete walls. Daniel Mercer sat on the edge of his narrow cot, the faint orange light from the corridor bleeding through the bars, drawing shadows across his face. He'd been inside for 12 years, long enough to stop counting the cracks on the ceiling and the winters that followed one another like an endless punishment. When the guards slid the envelope under his cell door, Daniel barely looked up. Mail was rare for him. His mother had died, his friends had disappeared, and Claire, she had stopped writing years ago. But when his eyes landed on the handwriting, his breath caught. The slant of the letters, the way she looped the C, it was hers. It couldn't be anyone else's. His hands trembled as he opened it. The paper smelled faintly of the lavender perfume she used to wear. The first line cut through him like a blade. "Daniel, I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else." He read it once, then again, slower this time, each word sinking deeper. She spoke of loneliness, of time healing what she never thought could heal. A man who helped her find peace. A man who understood what she'd been through. Daniel's pulse thudded in his ears. He stopped breathing somewhere between the lines where she wrote, "I didn't plan for this to happen, and I hope someday you'll forgive me." Forgive. The word felt obscene. He dropped the letter and stared at it on the floor as if it were a live thing, a venomous creature that had bitten him. The cell suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing closer. His mind swarmed with flashes, Claire crying during his trial, her promise to wait, her lips trembling as she said, "No matter what happens, I'll be here." He remembered every letter she wrote back then, every vow of loyalty that kept him alive when nothing else could. And now, after all these years, this? Mercer, his cellmate Eddie muttered from the next bunk, half asleep. "You good?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. He folded the letter neatly, then tore it once, again and again until the pieces fluttered like white ashes to the floor. But even shredded, he could still see the words, love, forgive, peace. Words that no longer belonged to him. He pressed his hands to his face, trying to contain the storm that was building. Inside that silence, something began to fracture, a slow, deliberate crack in whatever was left of his sanity. By the time the night guard passed by, Daniel was standing by the barred window, staring at the razor wire outside glinting under the moonlight. He whispered her name once, almost gently. Then, with a calmness that frightened even him, he said, "You lied to me, Claire. You promised." His voice was steady, but his eyes told another story, one that would not end inside these walls. As the lights dimmed and the prison sank into its midnight rhythm, Daniel lay awake, watching the ceiling. Somewhere deep within, a decision had already been made. Tomorrow he would start finding a way out. Days passed, but Daniel Mercer didn't speak. Not to Eddie. Not to the guards. Not even to himself. The letter had become a wound that refused to clot, its words echoing endlessly in his mind. He stopped eating. The untouched trays piled by his door were collected and replaced without question. Eddie tried to shake him out of it. "You're gonna fade away if you keep this up, man," he said, voice low, cautious. Eddie was used to broken men, lifers who'd lost their families, their grip on reality, their reasons to breathe. But Daniel was different. His silence wasn't numb, it was sharp. It had purpose. Each night, when the lights dimmed and the prison sank into its mechanical hum, Daniel lay awake, tracing every choice that led him here. He thought of the man he killed, Martin Geller, a stranger who'd insulted Claire during a drunken argument. One punch. That's all it took. Martin hit the pavement, never woke up again. Daniel told himself it was an accident, but guilt had gnawed at him every day since. Now, guilt had a twin, betrayal. And the two feasted together. "You ever think maybe she moved on, 'cause she had to?" Eddie whispered one night, careful not to wake the other inmates. "It's been 12 years, Dan. The world out there keeps turning." Daniel turned his head slowly, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Then why write to me now?" Eddie didn't answer. There wasn't one that made sense. That night, Daniel dreamt of Claire. She stood at the end of a long hallway, her face half hidden in light. He called to her, but when she turned, her eyes weren't hers, they were Martin's. Cold. Accusing. He woke in a sweat, heart pounding, the taste of metal in his mouth. The next day, he stared at the barred window until the sun bled into evening. Something inside him shifted, not rage exactly, but a clarity colder than rage. The kind that drives a man to act. When the lights went out that night, the hum of electricity stopped. A sudden darkness swallowed the block. The guards shouted in confusion, a power failure. Somewhere distant, metal clanged. Eddie sat up. Backup generator'll kick in soon, he whispered. You okay? But Daniel wasn't in his bunk. Through the faint glow of the emergency light, Eddie saw him crouched near the vent behind the toilet, the one they all said was sealed. His fingers worked fast, deliberate. A strip of metal from a food tray, sharpened against the floor, fit perfectly into the screws. Dan, what the hell are you doing? Daniel didn't look up. You ever feel like a cage teaches you what freedom costs? His voice was eerily calm, almost detached. I paid my price, Eddie. She just doesn't know it yet. The power flickered. The hum returned. The block came alive again with the rhythm of light. Daniel slid the metal back under his mattress before anyone could see. When the guards passed, he sat perfectly still, expression blank. Eddie watched him in silence, understanding something he wished he didn't. The man across from him was no longer thinking about survival. He was thinking about purpose. And whatever that purpose was, it had already begun. The storm arrived like a curse, black skies cracked open with thunder, rain hammering the prison yard in sheets so thick it blurred the watchtowers. The guards cursed under their breath, scrambling for cover as lightning splintered the horizon. For most inmates, it was chaos. For Daniel Mercer, it was opportunity. He'd spent weeks preparing for this. Every bolt he'd loosened, every inch of wire he'd memorized, every second of the guards' rotations, all of it led to tonight. The broken vent in his cell had been just the beginning. What followed was patience, precision, and a quiet hunger that refused to die. At lights out, while others buried themselves beneath damp blankets, Daniel moved. The storm muffled his footsteps as he crept toward the back of the laundry block, the forgotten corner of the prison where the walls met the razor wire fence. He knew the cameras here were old, half-blind from years of neglect. Still, his pulse hammered with every flash of lightning, every distant shout that felt too close. He knelt, reaching into the mud beneath a loose slab of concrete. His hand found what he'd hidden days earlier, a screwdriver filed into a blade and a piece of cloth wrapped around it to dull the shine. Each twist of the tool against the wire sent shivers up his arm. The rain burned his eyes, his fingers numb and slick with blood. Behind him, the floodlights flickered. Somewhere inside the block, a guard shouted something lost to the thunder. Daniel pressed harder. Almost there. He thought of Claire, her face, her letter, the word forgive echoing like mockery. He saw her smile, the one that used to calm him, now twisted into something else, deceit. His breath came short, not from fear, but from purpose. Every cut of wire was a heartbeat closer to her. Then the wire gave way. A narrow gap, just enough for one desperate man to slip through. He didn't look back. The mud swallowed his footprints as he crawled through the opening, the rain washing away evidence as fast as it formed. When his body hit the other side, he paused for a moment, breathing the air of freedom for the first time in 12 years. It didn't feel liberating. It felt dangerous. The blare of alarms shattered the night. Red lights flared from the towers as guards rushed out, rifles drawn. Inmate escape. Block C, someone screamed. Searchlights cut through the rain, slicing across the fence, too late. Daniel was gone. Cut to Claire. Inside her suburban home, the storm was only background noise, a soft rumble beneath the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Claire Mercer sat across from Detective Rowan Hale at her dining table, the same man who once testified against her husband. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she buried it beneath a practiced smile. Rowan reached across the table, brushing his fingers against hers. "You're quiet tonight," he said. She forced a smile. "Just tired. Weather makes me uneasy." He laughed. "You've always been the anxious type." Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time. Claire turned toward the window, the flicker of lightning illuminating her face. For a split second, she thought she saw movement beyond the glass, a shadow swallowed by rain. She blinked. It was gone. Rowan poured another glass of wine, oblivious. "To new beginnings," he said. She lifted her glass, the crystal trembling in her hand. Somewhere deep inside her, something cold whispered, "He knows." Back at the prison, guards shouted into radios, dogs barked, sirens wailed. But Daniel was already deep in the woods, soaked to the bone, face hidden beneath mud and rain. Each step away from the prison was a step toward her. The woods behind the Mercer house hadn't changed. The same crooked oaks, the same patch of moss-covered stones where Daniel once taught Claire how to skip rocks. Only now, everything felt colder, smaller, as if time itself had drained the warmth from the earth. For 3 nights, Daniel hid there. The storm had passed, leaving behind a damp silence. His clothes were soaked, his body bruised, but his mind was clear. He'd found her again. After 12 years of gray walls and steel bars, she was right there, living freely in the house they once built together. He watched through the trees, his breath shallow. The lights in the kitchen glowed soft and golden. Claire moved gracefully, barefoot, her hair shorter now, dyed a shade lighter than he remembered. She laughed at something, that same laugh that used to echo through their home, but it wasn't for him anymore. Rowan Hale was there to... Daniel saw him through the window, the detective, his shoulders relaxed, his hand brushing against her back as if the place belonged to him. The sight curdled Daniel's stomach. That man had sat across from him in the interrogation room 12 years ago, cold and righteous, calling him dangerous, unstable. Now he was sitting at Daniel's table, drinking from his glass, holding his wife. He clenched his jaw until it hurt. Each evening, Daniel crept closer, studying their habits. Rowan left early in the mornings, always carrying a briefcase, always looking over his shoulder like a man who knew the world had teeth. Claire, on the other hand, lingered by the window with her coffee, lost in thought. Once, she even stepped onto the porch, wrapped in a robe, her eyes scanning the treeline. For a moment, Daniel thought she sensed him. He froze. But she only sighed and went back inside. That night, he watched her through the rain-streaked glass as she walked upstairs. The soft glow of a bedside lamp revealed her reflection, and something caught his eye. Around her neck hung a small silver pendant. The one he'd given her on their wedding day. The one she had sworn would never touch her skin for another man. He felt the air leave his lungs. That necklace had survived everything. The trial, the shame, the years apart. To see it still there, shining faintly against her throat, shattered something inside him. It wasn't love anymore. It was obsession wrapped in memory. He whispered to himself, voice trembling, "You remember, don't you, Claire? You still wear it. You still remember." But the tenderness in his tone didn't last. The thought of her wearing it while lying next to another man twisted the sentiment into poison. The necklace no longer symbolized devotion, it mocked him. It reminded him of promises that now felt like lies. As the nights went on, Daniel's observations became rituals. He counted how long Rowan's car stayed parked. He memorized the exact time Claire dimmed the lights. He marked the pattern of her curtains opening at dawn. Every second fed the madness growing inside him, every detail turning love into fuel for revenge. Sometimes, he caught himself whispering her name softly, almost pleadingly, as if she might open the door, look out into the darkness, and call him home. But then he remembered the letter. "Forgive me." Those 2 words carved deeper than any wound. On the 5th night, he moved closer than ever before, crouched just beyond the porch, the scent of lilacs drifting from the garden she once planted for him. Inside, Claire laughed again, her voice overlapping with Rowan's low murmur. Daniel stared at the faint reflection of their silhouettes in the glass. His hand brushed against the mud-caked screwdriver tucked beneath his jacket. His pulse steadied. Love had once built this house. Now it was time to tear it apart. The night air was sharp and damp as Daniel slipped deeper into the woods, following a faint trail he remembered from years ago. The rain had turned the soil soft, masking his footprints. Eventually, he reached a small, sagging structure hidden behind overgrown vines, the old hunting shed that once belonged to his neighbor. No one came here anymore. It was perfect. Inside, the air smelled of rust and mildew. Moonlight cut through the cracks in the wooden walls, striping the floor in silver lines. Daniel found a rusted sink in the corner, a cracked mirror hanging crooked above it. When he turned the handle, brown water sputtered out, then ran clear. He splashed it over his face, watching the mud swirl away. The reflection staring back was unrecognizable. Hollow eyes. Sunken cheeks. A beard thick and uneven. A ghost wrapped in flesh. He hadn't seen himself properly in years. Prison mirrors were dull, clouded, made so men wouldn't remember who they used to be. He rummaged through an old storage box, finding a can of shaving cream, nearly empty, and a dull razor. It dragged across his skin, scraping years off his face one slow stroke at a time. Blood mixed with foam, but he didn't care. Each slice felt like peeling away another layer of the man the world had forgotten. When he finally looked up again, he saw something almost human staring back. But not the Daniel Mercer who once made his wife laugh. Not the man who built the small house on the hill and painted the nursery before they lost the baby. This man was quieter, heavier, forged by betrayal and time. He found an old flannel shirt hanging by the door, stiff with dust. He slipped it on, rolled the sleeves, and stood straighter. The image in the mirror shifted again. Less of a fugitive, more of a husband who'd come home to set things right. As he stared, the memories came rushing back. The bar was loud that night, neon lights, cheap whiskey, and too many tempers. Martin Geller had been mouthing off for an hour before Daniel finally snapped. He could still hear the man's slurred voice, the insult about Claire, the mocking laugh. Daniel didn't remember throwing the first punch, only the last one. The one that ended everything. He saw himself kneeling beside Martin's body, blood spreading across the floor, people screaming. And Claire, standing in the doorway, her hands trembling, her voice breaking as she begged him to stop. He blinked, and the shed came back into focus. His reflection blurred for a moment, caught between past and present. Claire had visited him every week after the sentencing, even when he told her not to. She'd held his hands through the glass, whispering, "I forgive you, Daniel. You made a mistake, but I still believe in you." That memory had carried him through every lonely night. But now it mocked him. The irony was unbearable. She had forgiven him for killing a man in rage, yet she'd turned around and betrayed him for another. He stared at the mirror one last time. "You forgave me for murder," he murmured, voice low and bitter. "But you couldn't forgive me for being gone." His reflection offered no comfort, only the faint outline of a man stripped down to vengeance. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of smoke and lilacs from the house downhill. Daniel pulled on a coat he'd found in the shed and stepped into the night. The man he once was had died long ago. What walked out of the shed now was something else entirely. Daniel didn't sleep much after leaving the shed. He spent his nights moving silently between the trees and the edge of the property, careful not to be seen. By day, he hid among the ruins of the old Miller barn a mile away, surviving on rainwater and scraps he stole from backyard trash bins. He had one purpose now, to understand why. He began with the phone line. From the barn, he could see the telephone wires stretching from the road to the Mercer house. Years in prison had taught him to watch, to listen. Every morning, Claire made a call before she left for work, short, careful conversations spoken in a softer tone than the one she used for anyone else. He followed the line down to the roadside junction box, pried it open, and spliced an old receiver he'd scavenged from a junk pile nearby. It was crude, but it worked. The first time he heard her voice on the line, his pulse quickened. She was laughing, light, familiar, intimate. Then came a man's voice. But confident. "Morning, sweetheart. Sleep okay?" Rowan Hale. Daniel froze. The name alone hit like a blow. He knew that voice, calm, measured, with that faint edge of superiority. He could still hear it from 12 years ago, echoing through the courtroom. Detective Rowan Hale, lead investigator on the Mercer case. Daniel remembered sitting on the stand, wrists shackled, while Hale described him to the jury as an unpredictable man with a violent history. He remembered Claire in the front row, tears streaking her face as the detective's words sealed his fate. And now, the same man was in his house, in his bed, calling his wife sweetheart. The receiver shook in his hands. He almost tore the wire apart right then, but stopped. This wasn't the time. He needed proof. He needed to hear the truth from her lips. Over the next few days, Daniel intercepted more calls. Some were mundane. Dinner plans, work updates, small talk, but others carried something darker beneath the words. Whispers about secrets, about keeping the past buried, about someone who can't ever find out. He pieced it together slowly, like fragments of glass forming a picture he didn't want to see. Rowan hadn't just met Claire after Daniel went to prison. He'd been there before, part of the team that questioned her during the investigation. And she'd confided in him. One of her statements, the one about Daniel's temper, had been what turned the case from manslaughter to murder. That realization hollowed Daniel out. She hadn't just betrayed him with love, she had betrayed him with truth. One evening, he broke into the old post office dumpster, searching through discarded letters. He found one addressed to Claire from Rowan, its envelope torn but legible. The handwriting was careful, neat, a man's handwriting. Inside, a single line. You did the right thing back then. You saved yourself. Daniel read it again and again until the words blurred. Saved herself. From him. From the man who took the fall for losing control one night, who'd spent 12 years believing she'd never stopped believing in him. Now he understood. She hadn't waited because she couldn't, she'd waited because she was never his to begin with. He sat on the ground, rain soaking through his clothes, the letter clutched in his hand. The rage that had once burned hot now settled into something colder, a stillness more terrifying than fury. He no longer wanted to kill her. Death was too easy, too fleeting. No, he wanted her to look into his eyes and see what she had made him become. He wanted Rowan to feel the same helplessness he'd felt in that courtroom, the powerlessness of watching your life destroyed while the world called it justice. Daniel folded the letter carefully, slid it into his coat pocket, and rose to his feet. The storm clouds gathered again above the trees, low and dark, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. It was time to go home. By the time Daniel reached the edge of the Mercer property again, the rain had thinned to a mist, clinging to the trees like smoke. He'd cleaned himself as best he could in the creek near the highway, cut his hair shorter, and dressed in the clothes stolen from the donation bin behind a church, faded jeans, a brown jacket, and a frayed cap pulled low. In the reflection of a puddle, he barely looked like the man who'd once lived here. He looked like a stranger, a drifter passing through. The house stood quiet in the fading light, the same pale blue paint she'd chosen years ago now chipped and weathered. Daniel's throat tightened. Every corner of it was familiar, yet distant, like a memory replayed from someone else's life. He watched for hours, waiting, studying the rhythm of the place. Finally, near dusk, Claire stepped outside with a basket of laundry, her hair tied back, her face calm. Peaceful. He walked out of the woods. "Ma'am?" His voice cracked slightly, roughened by disuse and the wind. "Sorry to bother you. I was wondering if you might spare a bit of food. Haven't eaten in a while." Claire startled, dropping one of the cloths. Her eyes darted toward him, cautious but polite. "You scared me," she said, forcing a small smile. "You shouldn't be out here, not in this weather." "I'll move on soon," Daniel murmured, stepping closer, his head still bowed. "Just saw the light. Thought someone might help." For a moment she studied him, the worn clothes, the tired posture, and then nodded. "Wait here," she said softly, turning toward the house. When she returned with a paper plate and some bread, her hand trembled slightly as she offered it. "It's not much." Daniel looked up. Their eyes met. It was like time split open. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She dropped the plate, the food scattering at their feet. The color drained from her face. "Claire," he whispered, his tone gentle, almost tender. "You still remember me?" She stumbled back a step, gripping the doorframe for balance. "No," she breathed. "No, this isn't possible." "I told you I'd come home," he said, his voice low, steady. "You used to say you'd wait forever. I guess forever ended early." Tears welled in her eyes. "Daniel, please. You can't be here. They'll They'll what? He interrupted softly. Arrest me again? Take me away. He smiled faintly, the expression chilling in its calmness. I already served my sentence, Claire. I just came back for something you owe me. She shook her head. You don't understand. Oh, I understand, he said, stepping closer until he could see the faint pulse in her throat. You found comfort in the man who helped put me away. The man whose words built my prison. Her breath hitched. You've been watching us. I had to, he said simply. How else would I know that you still wear my necklace? Her hand flew to her chest instinctively, touching the silver pendant. Her silence was louder than any confession. Daniel's expression softened, almost mournful. Tell me something, Claire. Do you love him? She stared at him, trembling, lips quivering, but no words came. The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. Her tears fell, soundless, onto the porch. Daniel's eyes darkened, the last trace of tenderness fading into something colder, more final. That's what I thought, he said quietly. You can't even lie to save him. From somewhere inside the house, a phone began to ring, sharp and urgent. Claire flinched, glancing toward it. Daniel didn't move. Go on, he murmured. Answer it. She hesitated, fear anchoring her in place. The ringing stopped. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and lilac. Daniel stepped back into the shadows, his voice barely audible. I'll come for the truth soon, Claire. Make sure you're ready to speak it. Then he turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving her standing in the doorway, shaking, breathless, and utterly alone. The phone trembled in Claire's hand as she pressed it to her ear. Her voice came out in a whisper, ragged with fear. Rowan, he's here. On the other end, Detective Rowan Hale froze mid-sentence. He was driving back from a late-night meeting, dashboard lights flickering across his tense face. Claire? What do you mean he's here? I saw him. Daniel. He was standing right outside the house. Her voice cracked. He looked different, but it's him. I know it's him. Rowan's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. Listen to me. Lock every door and stay away from the windows. I'm on my way. But he's gone now, she whispered. He said he'd come back for the truth. Claire, Rowan said, his voice low and steady, he escaped 2 nights ago. There's a manhunt across the county. You weren't supposed to know yet. Her heart pounded. You knew. I didn't want to scare you until... A soft creak interrupted her from the hallway. The front door latch clicked. Her breath hitched. Rowan, she breathed, so faintly it was almost a prayer. Claire, what is it? He's here again. The line filled with static. Then silence. Rowan slammed the accelerator, the tires shrieking on wet asphalt. His pulse thundered as the rural road swallowed his headlights. Don't let it be too late. Inside the house, Daniel moved like a shadow. The smell of rain clung to his clothes, and water dripped from his jacket onto the hardwood floor. Claire backed away toward the kitchen, clutching the phone that had gone dead. Claire, Daniel said softly, his voice barely a whisper. You called him, didn't you? Please, Daniel, just go. You don't have to do this. He tilted his head, studying her. You said that once before, the night I lost my temper. You begged me not to fight that man. I didn't listen then either. Her breath trembled. He's on his way. You'll be caught. Daniel smiled faintly. But maybe that's how it should end. The headlights of a car flashed through the window, sweeping across the walls. Rowan burst through the door seconds later, gun drawn, voice sharp and commanding. Daniel Mercer. Step away from her. Daniel didn't flinch. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting Rowan's with a calm that was almost inhuman. Detective Hale, he said quietly. I was wondering when you'd show up. You took everything from me, my life, my wife, even her heart. Rowan's jaw clenched. You took a man's life, Daniel. You made your choices. Daniel took a step forward. And so did she. Claire cried out, Stop. Both of you. But neither moved. In a single motion, Daniel lunged toward her. Rowan fired, the sound splitting the air like lightning. Claire screamed as Daniel stumbled, catching himself against the counter. The bullet had grazed his side, but his eyes burned with fury. He grabbed a kitchen knife from the rack, breathing hard. "You think you can take her from me again?" Daniel snarled. Rowan aimed again. "Drop it." Daniel's laugh was low, broken. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about killing anymore. It's about truth." He lunged. Rowan fired again, 2 sharp bursts. The impact threw Daniel backward, the knife clattering to the floor. He crumpled against the cabinets, blood spreading slowly across the tile. Claire dropped beside him, sobbing uncontrollably. "Daniel, please, don't." He looked up at her, eyes fading. "You should have told me," he whispered. "I would have understood." His hand fell limp. Sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights beginning to stain the night. Rowan lowered his weapon, chest heaving, staring at what he'd done, what they'd all done. Claire pressed her hand against the wound, tears streaming down her face. "He wanted the truth," she whispered. "And now we all have it." Outside, the rain began again, soft, steady, and merciless. The kitchen smelled of metal and rain, sharp, heavy, suffocating. Claire's knees pressed into the cold tile, slick with blood. Her hands trembled as she reached toward Rowan's body, his eyes half open, his lips parting for air that wouldn't come. "Oh God, stay with me," she whispered, pressing her palms over the wound blooming red across his chest. His gaze flickered to her face, then past her, toward the man standing only a few feet away. Daniel. He was still alive. Shot, but standing, his hand pressed against his own side. His breathing came shallow, but his eyes were steady, eerily calm. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her like a weight. "Don't waste your breath," Daniel said softly. "He's not the one you should be trying to save." Claire looked up, tears streaking her face. "What are you talking about?" "He's dying." Daniel crouched down beside her, his expression unreadable. "So was I," he murmured. "The day you stopped writing. The day you let him walk into our home and call me a monster." "Daniel?" "No," he interrupted sharply. "You don't get to say my name like that anymore." His voice cracked on the last word, revealing the hurt beneath the rage. "You loved him while I was rotting away for something I didn't mean to do. You told me you'd wait." Claire shook her head desperately. "I did wait. For years. You have no idea what that was like. The silence, the visits, the guilt. I lost everything too." He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "Then why him?" Her answer came as a whisper, trembling but honest. "Because he was there. Because I couldn't live in a grave built for the both of us." Daniel's jaw tightened. His hand, still smeared with blood, brushed against the edge of a photograph that had fallen from the counter, their wedding picture. It was speckled red, half covered in the chaos. He stared at it for a long time, his reflection warped in the glass. "Look at us," he muttered. "We were just kids. You said you loved me no matter what." "I did," she said, her voice breaking. "I never stopped, Daniel. But love doesn't survive in a cage. It turns into something else. Fear, guilt, regret. I loved you, but I couldn't wait forever for you to come back." He looked at her then, really looked, and something inside him cracked. The fury drained from his eyes, replaced by something hollow. "So all of this," he whispered, "was just time catching up to us." She nodded slowly, tears falling. "Yes." The room was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the rain outside. Daniel reached out and touched the blood-streaked photo, tracing the outline of her smile. "You were supposed to save me, Claire," he said softly. "Not become my reason for dying twice." He stood, swaying slightly, blood darkening his shirt. Claire reached for him. "Daniel, please don't." But he stepped back, shaking his head. "There's nothing left to kill here," he said. "Not him. Not you. Just the ghosts we made." He turned toward the back door, leaving the photograph on the floor, a smear of red across the memory of their happiness. As he disappeared into the rain, Claire clutched Rowan's still hand and sobbed. Outside, the sirens grew louder. The storm had swallowed the night. Rain lashed against the cracked windshield of a stolen pickup as Daniel drove aimlessly through the backroads, his side bleeding through a makeshift bandage. Every mile blurred into the next, until a familiar shape appeared through the downpour, the old white church on the hill. Their church. He pulled over, headlights cutting across the worn wooden doors. For a long time, he sat there, engine idling, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Then he exhaled, a slow, broken sound, and stepped out into the rain. Inside, the air was cold and heavy with dust. The candles near the altar were long melted down, their holders crusted with wax. Daniel's boots echoed softly as he walked down the aisle, trailing droplets of blood behind him. He found the small confessional booth, the one where Father Joseph used to record his sermons on an old tape recorder. The device still sat there, half covered in cobwebs. Daniel turned it on, the faint red light flickering to life. He stared at it for a moment before speaking. "My name is Daniel Mercer," he began, his voice low, hoarse. "I was sentenced to life for manslaughter 15 years ago. Tonight, I think I finished that sentence." The rain pounded harder against the windows. "I killed a man once, not because I hated him, but because I couldn't control what was inside me. I told myself it was justice, that it was about pride. But it wasn't. It was fear. Fear of being less. Fear of losing what I loved." He paused, breathing raggedly. "Claire was the one thing I thought I'd done right. She wrote me letters every week. She believed I could change. And for a while I did. Until she stopped believing." His hand shook as he wiped rain and sweat from his face. "I read her letter over and over, the one where she said she'd found someone else. It wasn't just betrayal. It was like watching the last part of yourself die. I wanted to hurt her for that. I thought if she could feel what I felt, maybe it would make sense again." Daniel's voice softened. "But tonight I saw the truth. She didn't stop loving me. She just stopped waiting for me. There's a difference." The tape hissed softly. "I wanted revenge. But all I did was prove them right. The judge, the guards, even her lover. I am exactly what they said I was." He took a long, trembling breath. "If anyone finds this, tell her. I finally understand. I don't forgive her. I don't forgive myself. But I understand." Outside, faint sirens began to rise in the distance, growing louder with each second. Daniel stood, slipping the tape recorder onto the altar. When the police entered minutes later, weapons drawn, he didn't move. He raised his hands slowly, blood still dripping from his palm. "Tell her," he said quietly, "I finally understand." He closed his eyes as the officers surrounded him, the rain echoing through the church like the last confession of a man who'd already met his judgment. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and rain-soaked coats. Claire sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together, the skin raw where her wedding ring used to be. Reporters filled the benches behind her, their pens scratching against paper, cameras whispering in mechanical clicks. At the front, the prosecutor shuffled through a thick stack of papers, all evidence that would never be used. Daniel Mercer was gone. Claire had been told that morning, in the cold corridor outside the courthouse. A correctional officer had found him before dawn, hanging from a bedsheet in his holding cell. No note. No struggle. Just silence. She hadn't cried. Not then. She just stood there, numb, staring at the tiled floor as if the world had already decided this ending long ago. Now, Judge Alden adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Due to the defendant's passing before formal arraignment," he said, his tone deliberately neutral, "these proceedings are hereby closed." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Cameras flashed. Somewhere, a journalist whispered the phrase that would become tomorrow's headline, "The Lover's Escape." Claire flinched. The irony stung, that they'd turned Daniel's death into something cinematic, a story about passion and punishment. None of them had seen what she had, the man behind the rage, the eyes that once looked at her like she was salvation itself. The man who'd loved too much, and lost everything because of it. She rose slowly, ignoring the murmurs that followed her. As she stepped out of the courtroom, the sound of thunder rolled across the city, distant, but familiar. It reminded her of the night he escaped, of the rain that had carried his footsteps back to her door. Outside, journalists swarmed, microphones thrust forward. "Mrs. Mercer, do you have any comment on your husband's death? Do you feel justice was served?" She didn't answer. The words felt meaningless now. Justice, truth, guilt, love. They all blurred together until they lost shape entirely. She kept walking, eyes fixed on the horizon. In her purse, the small cassette tape weighed heavily, Daniel's confession, the one recovered from the church. She hadn't listened to it yet. Couldn't. The very thought of hearing his voice again made her chest tighten. But she knew what it said. "Tell her I finally understand." Claire stopped at the courthouse steps, the drizzle dampening her hair. She looked up at the sky, gray, endless, merciless. "Understanding," she whispered, "came too late." A reporter nearby caught her words, scribbling them down as if they were a quote worth printing. They'd never know what she meant. They'd never understand that Daniel's story wasn't about escape. It was about what happens when silence festers too long, when love becomes a wound no one can heal. As she turned to leave, the courthouse clock struck noon. Each chime echoed like a verdict she couldn't appeal. The world would call it the lover's escape. But in her heart, it would always be the price of silence. The prison looked different in daylight, quieter, colder, almost peaceful. The clang of metal doors still echoed through the corridors, but time had dulled its menace. In cell block C, a guard led a new inmate down the narrow hallway, keys rattling softly at his side. "Here," the guard said, stopping in front of a rusted door. "Your new home." The inmate, a young man barely in his 20s, stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the scent of iron and old stone. A single cot leaned against the wall, its springs creaking under the weight of memory. He ran his hand over the peeling paint, the faint ridges beneath it catching his fingertips. Curious, he leaned closer, scraping lightly until a few flakes fell away. And then, beneath the grime and years of layered color, he saw it, carved deep, deliberate, with something sharp and desperate. Love doesn't end in death. It ends in truth. He stared at the words for a long time, frowning. "Who wrote that?" he asked. The guard shrugged, glancing briefly at the inscription before turning away. "Some lifer. Mercer, I think. Died a few months back. Took half the night shift to get his body down." The young man traced the words again, slower this time, as if trying to feel what kind of man had written them. "Was he a killer?" "Depends who you ask," the guard replied, locking the door. "Some say he was just broken. Others say he got what he deserved." Silence followed. The inmate sat on the cot, his eyes drifting back to the words on the wall. Outside, rain began to fall, soft, steady, the same rhythm that once echoed through a different night. The drops tapped against the bars like fingers keeping time. Somewhere in another part of the prison, an intercom buzzed to life, announcing meal rotations, the hum of daily routine swallowing the quiet. But inside that cell, the sentence carved into stone seemed to breathe. For a moment, the young man thought he heard something, a whisper, faint and fleeting, as if the walls remembered what they'd witnessed. He looked around, unease settling in his chest. Then he smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Guess everyone leaves something behind," he murmured. As the lights dimmed for evening lockdown, the camera lingered on the carving, the last mark of Daniel Mercer's fractured heart. The words caught the light one final time, gleaming faintly beneath the cracks in the wall. "Love doesn't end in death. It ends in truth." And then, slowly, the sound faded, leaving only the echo of rain, a heartbeat, and silence. The end.